Hello, and welcome to the PBS Intensive Training Day 6 webinar. My name is Stephanie Benson. Today we'll be talking about how to bring positive behavior support and person-centered planning to your organization. So first we're going to review a little bit about positive behavior support and person-centered planning. So that traditional view of challenging behavior is that traditionally, challenging behavior has been viewed as a function of the person's disability. It has been viewed as existing solely within that person who engages in the challenging behavior, and that it's maladaptive, that it's non-functional, that it's just meaningless behavior, and that the goal of intervention was to eliminate the behavior through suppressing the behavior, not worrying about what the function of the behavior might be, but instead, or why the behavior is occurring, but instead just get rid of it. And what you would often see happen is that you would just suppress one behavior and another behavior would pop up. And you would suppress that behavior and another behavior would pop up. So there's been a paradigm shift. Over time, challenging behavior has increasingly become understood as learned behavior. It represents a function of the interactions between an individual and his or her environment. And that this behavior is functional from the perspective of the person who engages in the challenging behavior. Positive behavior supports was a result of this change. So we want to implement a multi-tiered system of support, and positive behavior support is one of these. At the universal level, we want to teach and encourage in communication, have those predictable and proactive settings, and put an emphasis on using data for decision. At the secondary stage, we might look at small group interventions or look at function-based decision-making and simple interventions that we can do with a small group of people. At the tertiary stage, or at that final stage, we look at individualized PBS plans. It might be integrated with other types of positive support, such as person-centered planning or dialectical behavior therapy. Plans are then monitored and decisions are made based on the data. Now we're trying to change our understanding of positive behavior supports. A lot of providers in Minnesota only think of positive behavior supports as relating to those individualized interventions. So having to do with only the most tough cases, those that really require our attention. But instead, what we want to start to do is shift that frame from just that top tier of the behavior pyramid to instead thinking about positive behavior supports as a framework for prevention. So we want to focus first on universal positive behavior support. So at this level, we are supporting all people, not just individuals with the most intense behaviors, but how do we support all individuals in engaging in appropriate behavior to their fullest extent? We want to build positive social settings where everyone can practice and celebrate social skills that are important. So some defining characteristics of person-centered planning, it's that we want to empower the people to lead and make important decisions about their own lives. That meetings are driven by the individual being supported, and that team members are chosen by that person. We want to make sure that we're tailoring meetings to the preferences of that individual as much as we possibly can. We want to build opportunities to experience respect and community involvement. So this might be through some of our community mapping activities where we take individuals, or we have individuals go out into the community and engage in those natural supports. Some examples of some team members that individuals might want to include are friends, community members, maybe some family and peers. And we always want to think about how can we best support individuals to be self-determined and to express their own freedom of choice. We want to make sure that natural supports are tailored so we avoid an over-reliance on existing services. We want to build goals and actions on the person's strengths, not on their deficits, so it's a strengths-based program. Long-term goals and short-term actions focus on immediate optimal quality of life changes. So how can we make the person's quality of life better in that moment? And then we want to help them develop and maintain significant relationships. The use of visual planning strategies can help reduce the dependence on verbal or written information. Some other strengths of person-centered planning is that different strategies are available. There's lots of different tools that can be used, what's working, not working, the 4+1, the donut, the matching tool. It all helps us focus the team on the person as the lead during the meetings and provides a way for the person to directly lead and participate. So much like person-centered planning, the major goals of positive behavior support are, again, to promote those positive social interactions. We want to design positive, proactive, and predictable environments for individuals. And then we want to establish a database decision-making system so that we can make decisions based on the data instead of just on how we feel. Universal positive behavior support means building a positive social experience for everyone. So everyone works together to list these key person-centered values. You want to identify the social behaviors that reflect these values. How do we create a plan for increasing social interactions and support and recognizing each other to help encourage and prompt? And then finally, of course, always celebrating our successes. At the primary stage of our universal strategies for both person-centered practices and positive behavior support, we see that we want to assess organization across areas. We want to build capacity. We want to use our tools in the person-centered practices. And when it comes to positive behavior support, we're going to recognize and reinforce. We want to improve the social and physical environment so that we can be promoting those appropriate social behaviors. And these are behaviors and strategies that are good for all people. So when I think about positive behavior support, I think of it like layers of an onion in a way, or like a parfait. So you have different layers. At one layer, everybody is getting these good universal strategies. At the next layer, we have the secondary stage. Now, while still getting all those good things from the universal stage, we're adding to that for individuals who might need a little more support. For those who do need a little more support, it might be that the team monitors for some early intervention and some simple function-based problem solving. We might look at a small, simple intervention to increase interactions within roommates. It's looking at those early intervention things that can improve outcomes and simple strategies for improving quality of life. If at this level we're still seeing that challenging behavior, or it's still occurring more often than we would like to see it, that's when we look at the tertiary stage. At the tertiary stage, we continue to expand the impact of work plans across areas. We might tailor the types of person-centered planning that we're using, but again, we're always using that data to make decisions. And we're coordinating that quality of life evaluation across positive support, so across person-centered practices and positive behavior supports. At the tertiary stage, we might come up with an individualized behavior plan. So it's personalized to the individual who is engaging in this specific behavior or types of behaviors that we want to, that are of concern. Here is, there's a PBS example from another country that would be beautiful to watch. It's on YouTube. You are free to watch that. It's a positive behavior support example from England. So we're going to talk a little bit about system-wide positive behavior support. So there are different levels of change. At the first level, this is any change that makes a positive difference in the lives of people that we work with or the people that we support. So this is anything that I can do, that you can do, that we can do without needing permission from other people to do it. A level 2 change is any change an organization makes to its practices, structure, or rules that result in positive differences in the lives of people. So for example, this would be an organizational level change. So at your agency, we maybe make a change in how we're going to be supporting different people. We might make a new rule. We might make a new change in practices at how we're interacting with people. And all of that is a level 2 change. At level 3, again, we need permission to do these. These are practices, structure, or rules made at the system level. So I often think of, things like the state level. So if we're making changes at the state about how we're supporting people or about the words that we're using when talking about people that we support, for example, these can all lead to changes that will trickle down through level 2 and 1. So if we make a level 3 change, then it affects both level 2 and level 1. Some core features of system-wide PBS. It's always important that you get buy-in, especially from your leadership. Without that common philosophy and purpose and having your leadership on board, it can be really difficult to get moving in the right direction. You want to clarify that expected behavior and teach the expected behavior. How do we encourage, so reinforce that expected behavior, and discourage or not reinforce the undesired or target behavior, and then using different effective practices. So having a common philosophy or purpose. Staff members must understand key components of PBS, and they must make a commitment to implementing PBS. Without that commitment, without that buy-in, you're not really going anywhere. At the leadership level, we need an agency to make a commitment by its willingness to allocate resources for PBS-related activities. It might be that we need supervisory staff to support PBS by regularly communicating with staff, individuals we support, families or guardians, and with the greater community. It's important that administrators have some reasonable knowledge of PBS as well as the evidence supporting it. And the leadership team should be made up of a range of stakeholders. Here are some examples of people that could be on the leadership team. A leadership team meets regularly. They identify those evidence-based practices and monitor performance. They come up with those professional staff development activities, and they're implemented to make sure that enough knowledge and skills are there so that we can successfully serve the individuals we support. This team must also be able to determine when consulting assistance is needed compared to when current training allows those PBS activities to occur within the agency. So when do you need to call in that outside consulting behavior analyst as opposed to just utilizing the resources within your organization? The team must ensure that there are processes for efficient and effective leadership team meetings in place. So agendas, ground rules, means for determining consensus. Our staff members engaged in the review and development of procedures to keep everyone well informed and provide a level of control. We also want to come up with a way of recognizing staff members for their contributions. Clarifying expected behavior. So we want to ensure that staff members have and understand rules and procedures to promote implementation consistency. We want to determine what those general behavior support strategies are that can be used with all persons in each setting. Then we want to teach that expected behavior. So we want to provide a clear description and be able to model expectation for staff members as they serve individuals. The team must provide feedback to those individual staff members with regards to modifying and reviewing expectations, providing PBS. All staff must participate in fidelity checks on PBS support strategies. So fidelity is making sure that you're doing what you said you were going to do. So it's making sure that if a strategy has 4 steps to be implemented in order to be implemented correctly, that we're doing each of these 4 steps in the same way and correctly each time. And that would be to do something with fidelity. So to participate in fidelity checks would mean that you're participating in these opportunities to figure out whether or not you're engaging with the strategy correctly or not. And if not, having those support strategies in place to support that staff member to increase their skills in that particular area. Staff members must also regularly review maintenance of new skills that were established to address the needs of those individuals engaging in the challenging behavior. So after we've taught the expected behavior, we need to start to encourage that expected behavior. We want to use behavior-specific praise or specific positive feedback, and we want to provide that with a ratio of 4 to 1. So 4 positives to 1 correction or direction. I know from my experience in working in homes that it's really difficult, particularly when an individual might be nonverbal. We tend to give a lot of directions instead of allowing that individual some opportunities for choice or giving them opportunities to express what they want or giving them positive feedback. So it's really important to try to remember this 4 to 1 ratio. Once we've taught the expected behavior and we're encouraging it or reinforcing it, we want to discourage that undesired behavior. So we want to know, how do we make sure that this undesired behavior doesn't continue to happen? So there should be a menu of support and intervention strategies that promote learning of appropriate replacement behaviors that are also designed to discourage minor inappropriate behaviors. The staff member responses to social errors must be respectful and reduce the probability of escalating the behavior. So whatever it is that we're doing to discourage this behavior, we want to make sure that it's respectful, and we want to make sure that it doesn't make the behavior worse. We also want to utilize appropriate strategies to de-escalate or diffuse intense behaviors. And as always, we need to have a crisis plan in place just in case things go wrong. Effective practices, support and intervention strategies to be implemented consistently, immediately, and respectfully. The performance of all individuals must be monitored and evaluated. Active participation with others should occur, so take turns talking at dinner, using guided notes to encourage initiation. And opportunities should occur for individuals to have some control within activities. So how are we going to give these individuals opportunities to make choices for themselves? So we're going to talk a little bit about different interventions and review them. So at the tier 1, we have behavioral expectations are established and taught. We want to make sure that we have a reward system in place for appropriate behavior. Differentiated instruction for behavior is planned and implemented, and that we have a continuous use of data for decision making. Those expectations that we might want to teach for each setting would be a great way to use our matrix. So reviewing the PBS expectations and rules, you can see more matrix examples on mmpsp.org. But here's an example. So your matrix is more than just some tool that we have you fill out. Your matrix is also a tool for identifying skills that may be important to and important for the individual. It allows you to begin to understand what is important to the individual being supported. These categories can then be broken down into observable behaviors. For example, under cleaning up and row respecting each other, this category of offer help to each other, talk kindly if something isn't working, can be broken down into observable behaviors, like one person offers assistance to another, or respectful language is used in all exchanges. So once you've developed your matrix, you have your expectations. You might develop simple rules or behavioral expectations. Once developed, a support team can take the expectations to the entire staff for approval. After staff agreed upon the basic behavioral expectations, they can work as a group to define what the expectations would look like in each area of residence and community for each rule. So for example, being respectful in the workplace might mean cleaning up a workspace before the person of the next shift arrives, placing cell phones or other electronics on silent when in a meeting, and being respectful in the mall might mean standing in line patiently while waiting to order a beverage, or asking what stores others would like to go to and alternating who chooses first. So you can see that that example, that value of being respectful, looks very different in different settings. By developing a social interactions matrix and conducting observations of its implementation, it can give leadership an opportunity to examine the extent to which their expectations are observed in that natural environment. So it's great, we've developed these expectations, but what do we do next? It isn't enough to just develop expectations, but we need to teach them overtly to all individuals. So everyone follows the matrix. That means leadership, staff teams, people being supported, everyone that's involved. We use examples and non-examples to teach those expectations. And staff members need to agree on what they expect from an individual when implementing support or intervention. So in Tier 1 interventions, we're often trying to decrease the propensity of coercive interaction patterns. Those coercive interactions develop between two people when one person engages in a negative behavior to achieve a social outcome. The other person responds in an equally negative fashion, and then the initiator of the exchange increases the intensity of the negative behavior, and the ongoing exchange continues until one of them gives up. So through positive behavior supports, we want to break this pattern of behavior, and instead, if a person engages in an unwanted behavior, we react accordingly. So some tier 1 interventions: a greater number of staff around locations where there's a greater propensity for challenging behavior. So just putting your people where your problems are. You might want to work on reinforcing that desired behavior, consistently implementing consequences for undesired behavior. You can see here I have links to pbisworld.com, which is a great resource for different tiers of interventions that give you some different ideas about who it could be useful for, when to use it, and how to use it, along with examples for each strategy. You might work with staff to avoid having all people travel to the same community residence, or establish a staff member to regularly invite a resident for a beverage in the community. These are examples of tier 1 interventions. Modeling expected language, establishing more organized schedules, organizing those materials, or just speaking in a calm and neutral tone. So, for example, it can be really hard to engage with an individual who says, go do that, or go do your laundry. When you engage in those types of behavior, when you use that kind of language, that tone of voice really matters. So if you say, go do your laundry versus, hey, would you mind getting up and doing your laundry for me? Those are two totally different ways of giving the same direction. You might pause before you give a direction to make sure that the individual is paying attention. Maybe you get eye contact first. You might provide a container for the person's belongings to help them enhance their organization. You might use redirection in different ways. Tier 2 interventions involve progress monitoring for individuals who may be at risk for escalating, so making sure that using our data to watch those behaviors. The collection and use of data for decision making, so consider ways to track those lower level behaviors to shift focus to prevention instead of just putting out fires. We want to make sure that there's systems for increasing structure and predictability for individuals, and they should be designed and put in place. A system for increasing contingent adult feedback should be implemented. There must be individualized interventions and supports based on assessment information that focuses on prevention of problem contexts, instruction of functionally equivalent skills, and instruction on desired performance skills, strategies for placing challenging behavior on extinction, strategies for enhancing contingent reward for desired behavior, and the use of those safety consequences if needed. So always having a crisis plan in place. At Tier 3, we really talk about functional behavior assessment, and it should be implemented. You can see there are two different websites here, the pbisworld.com and the mmpsp.org training materials site. These both give great information about functional behavior assessment process. This should be a team-planned comprehensive assessment, and the assessment results must be linked to appropriate behavior support strategies. So how do we conduct an FBA? We first establish a multidisciplinary team, so we have different people with different perspectives. We identify the challenging behavior of concern that we want to change, and we write an operational definition, including examples and non-examples. Then we collect some baseline assessment data. So before we do anything, we collect indirect data. So we collect some rating scales, some surveys, some interviews, and we also collect some direct data. Maybe ABC data collection or scatter plot observations. And we look at this information before we do anything. So this is before any intervention. We develop a hypothesis statement. So what is the function of the behavior? And then we test that hypothesis to see if we're right. So we might implement some simple intervention to see if that hypothesis is correct. And then we develop that behavior support plan. To review, these are our functions of behavior: to seek and obtain or to avoid and escape. And you can seek and obtain or avoid and escape both attention, tangibles, and sensory. A behavior support plan includes the following. It needs to include a plan to prevent by addressing setting events and antecedents. So we want to look at interventions to modify or eliminate both the setting events and the antecedents. We want a plan to teach replacement or desired behaviors. We also need a plan to decrease reinforcement for the challenging behavior. So once we've figured out what the function is, we want to decrease the reinforcement for that challenging behavior and instead increase reinforcement for the appropriate behavior that we want to see instead. Those setting event interventions are things that can modify or eliminate those slow triggers. So things that may influence the likelihood of a behavior being set off later in the presence of an antecedent. So here's some examples: the physiological, the cognitive, emotional, the physical environment, and social activity. Some examples of what that might look like, and then an example of that intervention. So for the physiological, if we're experiencing some pain or discomfort from an illness or medication, we might see the doctor about a change in medication. If we're experiencing fatigue, we might implement a daily schedule prioritizing 8 hours of sleep with embedded naps into the day if possible. We might use noise-canceling headphones to get rid of loud noises, or we might sequence high probability and low probability requests to mitigate some of those difficult tasks or a change in routine. An antecedent is a fast trigger, or the event that immediately precedes the occurrence of the target behavior. This is a focus on prevention. So we want to change the trigger, or the antecedent, to make that behavior irrelevant, and we want to address the function ahead of time. Some antecedent interventions: you might use preferred items as a distractor. You might utilize choice making. How are you delivering that instruction? Are you using a calm and neutral tone of voice? Are we implementing pre-activity interventions? So, for example, for an individual who may engage in behaviors to obtain attention, we might give them small doses of attention before the activity so that they're less likely to engage in that behavior during the activity. Using highly preferred activities or items to increase interest level. So taking something that may be a boring, dull task and incorporating a preferred item into that task. We talk about tolerance for delay and reinforcement, which is a great tool to teach individuals how to wait. And then competing schedules of reinforcement. We have consequent interventions that come on that back end, so that event that immediately follows the challenging behavior. We want consequent interventions to be based in reinforcement. We need a plan to both eliminate and reduce challenging behavior while both reinforcing alternative behaviors and desired behaviors. Extinction. Extinction is the withdrawal of reinforcement from a previously reinforced response, and the rate of behavior decreases. So, for example, if an individual has been receiving attention from staff for engaging in challenging behavior, then staff would want to remove reinforcement from the individual for engaging in that challenging behavior. When you do this, it is likely that the behavior will increase before it decreases. This is called an extinction burst. Differential reinforcement should be used because it's a positive approach. It's reinforcement-based procedure. It progressively changes behavior, and you're able to plan for fading reinforcement for more natural contingencies. Differential reinforcement procedures are often used or are used in conjunction with extinction. Here's a summary of the differential reinforcement procedures. DRL, or differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior, is used to reduce the behavior to lower levels. So this might be behavior that you're okay with happening at a certain rate, but not all the time. Differential reinforcement of zero occurrences, or DRO, is to reduce the behavior down to zero, so to get rid of it entirely. It focuses on increasing the amount of time that non-occurrence is happening. So for example, Tom will have no occurrence of leaving his work area in a 40-minute period. And then we slowly increase that 40-minute period to 50, to an hour, to 2 hours, to whatever is appropriate before, maybe 50 minutes, and then we take a 10-minute break as appropriate. DRI and DRA, so differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors and differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. Both of these focus on reinforcing a functional alternative to behavior. So for example, Tom will press a button to indicate that he wants to take a break instead of yelling and face slapping. So in this case, this would be a DRA because it is possible that Tom could press his button and yell at the same time. So they are not incompatible. Now, if it was just that Tom will push a button to indicate that he wants to take a break instead of face slapping Face slapping and pushing a button are incompatible because you cannot push a button and slap your face at the same time. So those would be incompatible behaviors. So this is a summary of the DR procedures. Thank you for listening. This has been Day 6 webinar. I hope you have a wonderful day.